Good.
Right, hello and welcome to a very, very special edition of the Create With podcast here in New York. BubbleCon has literally just wrapped about half an hour ago, and we have hot-footed straight over to the Bubble HQ round the corner. I've got two amazing guests who've been on stage as well with some great talks. I've got we've got Andrew Vernon, who's a senior Bubble developer, and Sam Morgan, who's also a Bubble developer, but really they don't need any introduction, I don't think. Anyone who's on Twitter or on the forum knows exactly who you guys are, so thanks so much for taking the time out to join us today.
Absolutely. Our pleasure.
Yeah. It's awesome. Huge fan of the podcast.
Yeah, same. I listen to it with my wife all the time.
Amazing. Oh God, that's so great. Well, we obviously love what you guys do, and what an amazing 2 days. I mean, after the first year, which happened last year, we weren't sure how do you top that. It was like this year was really, I think it brought it up a level. It felt like production values were up. There was, I think, way more content than last year as well. Yeah. But I thought like a good place for us to maybe kick off is for anyone who wasn't here, like maybe we could go through some of the top things that were announced, because I know a lot of people are interested in mobile and AI. So maybe we could like run through maybe a couple of the top things that like your highlights of BubbleCon.
So I think the mobile was a big one, right? Yeah. So releasing mobile into alpha and inviting everyone in the live in-person BubbleCon audience to participate, which is pretty exciting. Other ones, we announced the AI assistant, which is pretty cool. Internally, we've been calling that 10-minute MVPs, which kind of describes the functionality a little bit better. But the idea is a single prompt can get you to actually like a very simple version of your app, complete with workflows and data and all.
Function.
And then I think the big one that I'm going to speak for myself, but that I'm most excited about is the acquisition of Flusk. I think that was a big one, bringing Wes and Victor onto our team and acquiring this great security tool. I think for me was probably the highlight of the conference.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And honestly, I think the other things I was really excited about is several peeks at work that's ongoing, redesigning the editor, including a really heavy peek at the workflow tab in particular. Quite a bit of work has been underway really for a while on redesigning that, making it more usable. So some features that were teased there and released in beta that I'm really excited about. One, very practical, is if you're going from an element and you want to figure out what workflows are tied to that element, making it really easy to get from the element to the workflows that are associated. Also, workflows that trigger a custom event. Typically, there are multiple of those, and you have to use app search. At least you've had to use app search to be able to find those. And the new workflow tab is going to make it much easier to go to a custom event, see all the places that it's triggered, jump to one, get back to the other. And then I think the final thing that I would mention that I don't know if people have picked up on yet, one person mentioned it on Twitter last night, but every workflow, when you click onto it, has a unique URL in the editor. And that means you can share that URL with your team and link them directly to a particular workflow, event. And I think it'll make collaborating on those things just that much easier. Really excited about it.
Absolutely. It was so exciting that when it was announced, it was pretty much live for people to try straight away. So of course, I, like probably everyone else, turned it on immediately and started playing around with it. But I think, like you say, that like being able to share links directly to like, a specific set and workflow, like for very long workflows, that's really useful. And also that ability to see where is triggering that workflow, but that wasn't always easy before, was it? If you've got, maybe you're using back-end workflows quite heavily or whatever, you want to know, okay, what actually is connected to this if you want to make changes to it. So that was really exciting. And and the Flusk thing as well was super. I think the fireworks that went off made everyone jump. And I
don't think anybody but the Flusk guys knew about those.
Emmanuel definitely.
Everyone was super shocked. That was really exciting. So it would be awesome to see some of that functionality hopefully kind of coming into Bubble, because I've been everyone I've been speaking to has been raving about Flusk and how useful it is.
We're very excited about that.
Yeah,
really looking forward to. I think we're going to keep it as a separate app for now.
Yeah.
But the idea is eventually to work it into the Bubble plan so that the functionality, all of our users can access it. So really excited for that.
Plus, the Flusk guys are great. The insights that they bring into what the Bubble community needs, I mean, it's evident in what they've built already in Flusk. And so they're joining our team. We're very excited about
have
that.
some more Bubble devs on the team.
Yeah, and I think it's just a lot of insight that they'll bring to the table. And then obviously as we make those features available to more Bubble users, I think that'll be really interesting. It's a win-win.
It really is. I mean, they've been flying the flag on like app security and privacy rules for a while. And as we all know, like this is just so important. I think that there are a lot of apps that aren't secured in the optimal ways, and they've really been pressing. This is important, and it is really worth spending a bit of time to get your privacy rules right, because it's one of these things that you've just got to do, and it's they've been really at the front of pushing people to do it. So it's great to see them join Bubble, and hopefully that word gets spread even further, and everyone, the whole developer community benefits because we get more secure apps, and it's kind of good.
We're excited to be able to use their product on our app finally. Before they required collaborator access, so when they weren't part of the company, we couldn't exactly invite them in. But we spend a lot of time making sure that our app is secure, and Flusk will certainly make that a lot easier.
Yeah, having dedicated tools that look for leaks or anything that's not protected is always a win. It's
in such a nice UI as well.
Yeah.
It's really it's brilliant. And the other two bits that we kind of touched on there were mobile. So we saw in the kind of keynote presentation, we had a couple of demos of mobile apps that had been built with the new Bubble native mobile builder, and I think they looked amazing. Like I think everyone's. These are genuine, like React Native proper apps. This is not a wrapper. This is high quality UX that is, really kind of game changing. And then downstairs at the demo desk, I saw everyone was trying it out as well, and great to see that beta coming out. But was that another big moment for you guys as well, seeing that?
I think it's a huge win. Wrapping a Bubble app has been available for a long time. People are very familiar with that in the community. We see that often. But even when you do that extremely well, you can always tell the difference. And I think being able in the exact same app, which means shared database, shared backend, to support mobile in a native way with a front end that is web compatible, I think it's a huge win. And it's been kind of interesting in one of my personal apps this summer. I had a little bit of a fire drill where I had to build a wrapped app very quickly because a partner application was acquired and shut down. Long story, but took me a while to. I haven't built mobile first ever. We obviously build responsively. But so I had to go through that whole process, wrapping an app, the header, the nav bar, all that stuff. It takes a while to set it up and have it act like an app. And rebuilding that functionality using our native app builder, the entire structure of the app was set up in under an hour. With all the navigation, the tabs, the views, all of that, I was super, super impressed. So really excited for people to get their hands on it. I think they'll be impressed.
It's I've been quite astounded by just like the fluidity of the animations, and they are 100% native, and great to see it's starting to roll out and people being able to try it. And like you say, having the web app and the mobile app all in the same project, you're not having to spend a ton of time connecting to some other database, or like if you've got a Bubble app already, you're going to be able to spin up a really fantastic iOS, Android app, get them on those app stores, and potentially it's another great customer acquisition channel as well. As we've as I've seen with the Shopify app store, being on those app stores can be a game changer for your app in terms of attracting users and kind of getting distribution. So it's going to be a whole new world for developers, which is really exciting.
Exciting times.
For sure. And the other thing which we saw was a bit more of a peek into what's happening with AI at Bubble. So I think last year we got a little bit of a a bit of a teaser, I guess, of the direction. But this year we saw some real demos of going from a prompt to effectively a working app. Like, and I think this is what I think people are really excited about. Because obviously we've seen a lot with Replit and Cursor. People seeing that in more kind of developer type platforms, but it's really exciting to see that come into Bubble. So is that something you were excited about as well?
Yeah, super. I think, we've struggled for a long time with what we call internally the blank canvas problem, right? This idea that when you as power users, we know it takes a long time to learn Bubble. A lot of the reason that is because when you first sign up and you're dropped into the Bubble editor, it's very overwhelming and it's hard to sort of navigate, figure out what to do. I remember when I first discovered Bubble, my first thought coming from platforms like WordPress and Squarespace and some of the simpler no-code platforms was, well, let me just grab a template and see how that works. And then you kind of quickly realize that can sometimes be even more overwhelming than it's
really
worth.
So
then you want to go back to the blank canvas, but you're still kind of stuck in the same place. And a lot of us realized that the way to do this was to methodically approach Bubble as a new thing to learn, take our time, go find the right YouTube tutorials, all this stuff. We think that these advances in AI will really help our blank canvas problem. The idea that a new user can come on, enter a prompt about what they're trying to build, and get true guidance right away with a completed app. It's not just building the app, but eventually, diving into explaining about the app and sort of teaching them about what was built and how to edit it. We think that this is going to be really, really big for new users in the future. And ultimately, the faster you can learn Bubble, the more Bubble can grow. So we think that's really, really exciting.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was. I think we've all, when you first get into Bubble, it's a very powerful platform, but there is a lot to learn in it as well. So the faster you can get someone to that kind of wow moment is, if you can go from a prompt to setting up things like the database, the UI, connecting them all together, just getting you into it, I think is going to be a really big thing. And understandably, we've seen tons of buzz around things like Replit, but ultimately, you've got to have a lot of technical know-how to really deploy that. It's still a fairly kind of advanced. It's like pretty much a developer product. Whereas I think Bubble already has opened software development to a lot of people. I think this is going to expand that again up to a whole new audience who maybe would have struggled with building things. Like even with the visual editor, this brings it to a whole nother level of abstraction. So it's going to be really interesting to see where this goes, because I think this is just the first step on the journey. Everything we've heard is Bubble are really all in on AI. So it's going to be really interesting to see.
Yeah, I think along those lines, what I'm really excited about is 10-minute MVP allowed us to build the functionality where AI can start to understand the JSON structure behind the scenes of how a Bubble app functions, how data is structured, how workflows function. And I think getting to a point where AI understands that about your app unlocks all sorts of functionality that I think can be really interesting. And that's where eventually you could start to see features that really benefit power users with existing apps and things along those lines down the line. So very excited for that.
Absolutely, and like I saw in a couple of the panels and speaking with people, a lot of people are already using AI to help them with Bubble by maybe asking it to help them set up the API connector and things like that. So there are already things you can do today with AI to help you with Bubble. So it's great to see some of that stuff coming into the platform. And of all the sessions that from the last 2 days, were there any things that really stood out to you as being your favourites? Because there was just so much, wasn't there? I mean, it was, like people were saying, it's like it was very much difficult trying to choose which talks to go to, because there were so many good ones on multiple stages.
Good problem.
I
think what stands out to me, I feel like SEO is not talked about enough in the Bubble community, and I really loved Gregory John's approach to SEO in general. Bubble has gotten this rap that Bubble just can't do SEO. It just can't do it. You got to use another platform if you want strong SEO. And I thought Gregory, he just approached that in a really compelling way to communicate. There are tools that allow you to do this natively in Bubble. There are techniques that you can follow. It's actually really formulaic. And if you follow these steps, there's no reason that you can't score really highly on Lighthouse. And I just think that's an incredible message for people to hear. And honestly, it's an area where we're even working
still
on
learning.
learning and exploring on our app as well. And so
Yeah.
I found it to be super informative.
I thought that was a great one. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to pick a favorite, right? Like I think it was all awesome. I think Petter's talk stands out. Talking about workload units, and I loved a lot of the great panels. I mean, your panel on AI was fantastic. There was a great session this afternoon on building an agency with Andrew Haller and Peter Kang. So some really great minds in the agency world. Yeah, I agree. It was hard to choose. There was sometimes like competing sessions. So I'm looking forward to catching. Some of I tried to when there were two sessions I wanted to go to. I tried to catch a little bit of each, but I'm looking forward to watching some of the recordings online and seeing some of the stuff that I missed as well. So
that's it. It's all going to be on YouTube, I think.
Yep.
So even if you weren't there in person, you can definitely go and look through all those. There's so much great content, isn't there? And I completely agree on the SEO point as well. I mean, I think a lot of what you guys do every day with building a lot of the Bubble marketing pages, which I think is all pretty much on Bubble. I think is testament that it can be done and you can rank highly. SEO wise with Bubble, so it's just following, looking for those tips and setting things up and doing it in the right way that can make it possible. But for the next bit, I thought it would be interesting to dive a little bit more into the AI angle in particular, because I know I've seen in particular you, Sam, you shared quite a bit about you experimenting with AI. And
I've been diving into it. I love learning things, so that's really where it comes from. Anytime there's a new technology out, it's in my nature to dive in and see what it does and how I can use it to my advantage and stuff like that. So I've been using a lot of Cursor and AI tools to honestly just teach myself to code. That's really what it is. And I think a lot of people, it's interesting, a lot of people have asked me if there's this weird thing of because I'm doing that, do I not use Bubble anymore? It's really, I kind of view them as two separate things. I mean, the AI stuff I'm doing, I'm not really using it to build apps, I'm using it to teach myself to code. So I think that's kind of the difference. It's not people have asked me if I view Cursor as a competitor to Bubble or things like that. I really don't. I don't think that we're there, and I think that AI is in a really great place with code where if you're someone super technical and you have a desire to learn, there's never been a better time. And I'm someone who, the reason I got into Bubble was because I couldn't learn to code. But if I could, I would have, happily continued down that journey. And so for the first time with AI, you kind of feel like you have this personal teacher in your pocket at any given moment. So as long as you're willing to ask it the right questions, break things down into small chunks, and you have this sort of willingness and desire to learn, it's a really, really powerful tool right now.
That's it. And I think a great thing about Bubble is how extensible it is. So you can maybe use Claude or Anthropic to generate some code that you then run either in Bubble with the JavaScript thing, or maybe you could even spin up a little thing with Replit and connect it to Bubble as a little microservice. But that's, I think, certainly for the apps I've been working on, having Bubble be the hub for everything. And then, if you need to call a specific service that you've made with kind of code or synthetic code or whatever, then you can do that. But I think that's a great part of Bubble. And the other thing that we kind of touched on was plugins, wasn't it? And the difference of how many plugins there are with Bubble. There's and for AI and for all sorts of other things. Do you have any kind of favorite plugins that you like working with in Bubble?
Ooh, good question.
I think, when it comes specifically to AI, I think we tend to lean more towards the API connectors. So we have a bit more control over the prompts and how things are set up. If you're talking plugins in general, we also tend to steer clear of them on our app just because it's so big. But, I think the ones we do use, I think live text is used pretty extensively around which is something that probably should be a native feature at this point. But
what does that plugin do? Because that's I've heard a lot about it.
It watches the input for real-time updates. So without the live text plugin on Bubble, when you're let's say you're using an input as a search input for a repeating group, the repeating group will only update after you've either hit enter or blurred the input or unfocused the
Yeah.
input, right? So only after the input's value is changed.
Yeah.
What the live text plugin will do, and there's a couple different ones, but the basic idea is you assign an ID to the input, and then the plugin will watch that input and update its value on every character entry. So every time you type a character, it's completely instant, and the repeating group will update with the proper search results. So
Nice.
you get real-time feedback as you're searching, which is tends to be what people expect on the web.
Yeah. So you use that plugin yourselves at Bubble then for
We
a
do,
lot of
yeah,
stuff.
yeah. We
Nice.
use it pretty
Interesting. I'm gonna have to check that one out. That's
Yeah.
a top tip. And we saw a lot of kind of apps showcased as well, whether it was in like the community awards or even with the Immerse program. That like it seemed to be everywhere. At BubbleCon, like there were a lot of apps that were using it, and even just on stage, like a lot of people were talking about there were certain kind of quite famous apps that are built with Bubble that use AI. Do you have any kind of favourite or apps that stand out that you've been like, wow, I've been kind of blown away of that is this actually built with Bubble? This is kind of mad. Because there's definitely been a few kind of mentioned throughout the conference. Is there any?
Yeah, I think I've been a big fan of Marina and Anita and VoicePen AI for a while. I've been following them on Twitter for a while. I love what they did, and just the way that they launched and were kind of successful right away is really exciting to see. That's kind of the one that comes to mind for me.
Yeah, the other one that I would call out is, I cannot think of the name of the app right now. Goodness.
What does it do?
It's basically a voice assistant that can handle calls.
Okay, is this SynthFlow?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes, that's it. Yeah,
I am
very cool.
when you think of a Bubble app, and even a Bubble app with AI, I don't know, voice feels like something that's just still untouchable.
Yeah.
And so it's so fascinating to see that use case in particular running extremely well.
At massive scale as well.
Yeah.
I mean,
They're able to raise some
very,
capital and
yeah.
really taken off.
So it's been fascinating to watch them and kind of their rise.
Yeah,
Really
and
cool.
I think that's another app that's a really good showcase of multiple things. But I think the design is beautiful. It's one of those ones that you go to the site and you use the product and you're like, this is really beautifully designed and it's doing amazing stuff.
Yep.
I think that's a great example of an app that's really setting the bar. There's one thing that we certainly tried to do with the podcast, and I think at BubbleCon and at the Create With conference and NoCode Paris and all of these is we really trying to inspire people with what's possible with Bubble, because I think a lot of people don't realise you build this gigantic kind of voice AI platform that looks beautiful. No one using it would ever think that it was built with something like Bubble, but it really is possible to build these complex apps now, isn't it?
Absolutely.
100%. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. And is that something you see more and more of? Like, there's a lot of people are starting with Bubble and then kind of I think SynthFlow was probably a case where it did start with Bubble and it's scaled quite quickly. A lot. It feels like a lot of AI apps are starting on Bubble and actually scaling very quickly because the demand is there.
Yeah. It's something that we're seeing. I mean, AI has given people the power to build really incredible things with Bubble. I was just talking last week at a conference in Berlin about building AI apps with Bubble and how to basically the difference between when AI first came out, you had kind of like AI as a main feature, right? And I think that's going to be a little bit trendy over time. But now you're starting to see some really cool use cases where AI is sort of just working behind the scenes to power functionality. And I think that's really some of the most exciting stuff. If you think about there's a lot of things that were possible without AI that are now much easier because of AI. And I think that's some of the kind of the coolest use cases that I'm seeing getting built. So things like, if you take an example, let's take our standard to-do app, right? You might want to generate sample data for your user to onboard into so that they don't onboard to a blank app. And the way you would do that before is by gathering as much information from that user as possible during onboarding. So you're asking them, hey, give me some projects that you need to work on. Now give me some tasks for each of those projects. With AI, you can take, what effectively might have been 3 screens and 12 inputs to gather all that data into one multi-line input and just have your user type a simple description of some things that are on their mind, right? And then use AI to kind of expand on that, generate all the data that you need, and actually create the data in Bubble to display so that when they onboard, they now see their projects and their to-dos, right? It's just a simple example, but that's the stuff that gets me the most excited about AI and what it can do for developers, because all of these old, like, if conditions that we had to program manually, we can now make really smart decisions using AI, and ultimately it just benefits the end users. I think users have a much better experience because of it.
A more catered experience. You're doing something similar in user loop.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's like you're saying, it's going beyond just having something like a chatbot or returning a string of text. Is doing more advanced things like for example in my app, like taking thousands of bits of customer feedback and using AI to first categorize, then pick out trends, work out how much revenue people who said this do it. Like, it's that kind of, and that's what I'd like to see more people doing in Bubble, is returning structured data from LLMs. It's not you're not just restricted to returning a string, like writing a bit of text. You can return blocks of JSON that with like really useful stuff in. So there were a couple of panels where that was touched on of how to do it in Bubble. So there's quite a few different ways you can achieve that, depending on which AI you're using. But I think if I was to guess, if we come back next year, there'll be a lot more apps that are doing very advanced stuff with AI in Bubble.
Agreed.
There's one thing that I think came up quite often was just Bubble being one of the best ways, full stop, not just the NoCode, but in software development in general, to get an AI app off the ground and test stuff. Is that something you're hearing from users as well? Is that is that speed to market, which is so important with AI, is helping with Bubble?
I mean, really, you could even take AI out of the equation, and just that is Bubble's mission, just to be the fastest way to take an idea to a working app that can then safely scale on the infrastructure that it was built on. And that really is the mission, is just the person with the idea has the ability to sit down and realize that idea and interact with it very, very quickly, and then iterate as they find need and market fit. And AI makes that even more interesting, especially because we're in the season that we're in, where AI is so interesting, and there's so much that is newly possible with it. But really, that's always been Bubble's mission, is to just make that as fast as possible, and put you in a position to be able to iterate.
And I think that came across really strongly at this conference in particular. In fact, I don't really recall seeing the words no code mentioned anywhere. It's really, this is becoming the default way to build software, and it's like everyone should try it. It's the fastest way. It can scale. We're seeing these very large apps built with Bubble go from MVP through to massive venture rounds, huge user uptake. So I thought that was a really good takeaway from the conference, is that I think we're maybe moving past that term no code, and this is the way to people should think about building software. Full stop.
It's really just the next logical abstraction on code, right?
Yeah.
So when you think about it, like, you have frameworks like React and Ruby on Rails and all these frameworks that for decades, honestly, have been making coding easier for developers by abstracting away certain concepts and giving them much more useful syntax to work with, right? I think tools like Bubble, and Bubble especially at the forefront of it all, is just a very logical abstraction layer to give a GUI to the code. And I think the future is one where that, like, the two worlds definitely fuse, especially with where AI is going. I think this will always be a valuable thing to have. The name of the game, especially like when you think about coding with AI versus using a no-code tool like Bubble, is maintainability, right? So like, as your app grows and scales and gets really, really big, I'll always believe that it's easier to maintain an app with the GUI, like to be able to actually see the app, click on an element and say, okay, that's what this is doing. Now here's what I want to do to manipulate that. It's always going to be easier than trying to remember which line of code that functionality lives in, right?
And the barrier to entry for other people on your team to be able to maintain or understand or tweak is so much lower if you have a GUI on top of whatever the logic is in your application. And we're seeing that at the enterprise side of things, and with the kind of in-office tool sets that companies are making. They find it really interesting because their team can be taught to maintain whatever's built. and build onto it. And Bubble's just so much more approachable and learnable in that way compared to code.
Absolutely, and I think a lot of what Bubble announced at BubbleCon, so like for example the new workflow view, that is really, it ties in with the mission, the longer term mission of AI. Is just, yes, if you're generating an app with AI, you've got suddenly a really easy way to see exactly what that workflow is doing, where you're not having to dive through a ton of code. You've got a very easy, like a human understandable way of seeing what the logic of the app is actually doing. So yeah, I think Bubble is fairly uniquely positioned to be a real leader in this space if it can, you know, bring that AI and the kind of the visual editor of you know, of Bubble and the workflow model and everything together. It is really, really powerful.
Yeah.
So I thought like we kind of maybe be wrapping up what your predictions were for the next year, because it's pretty hard to predict what's going to happen. But like if we look back over the last year, like AI seems to be accelerating to such a degree that it's getting increasingly hard to make predictions, I think. But I think there are a few kind of hints in BubbleCon of maybe the direction of things to go. So what would you kind of make your predictions for next year be?
I think we've spent a lot of time over the past year especially, but even before that, really the past 2 years, paying down a lot of tech debt that I think everybody knows that we have. And it puts us in a really, I'm very excited for the next year, because I think we're at the point where we're going to start to see all of that work pay off, right? That we're at the point where it's getting easier to iterate and add new features to Bubble because we've paid down so much of that tech debt, and we now have a very easy platform to build on top of. Still a lot of work to do in a lot of areas, but I'm just really excited for, I guess, like the pace to pick up a little bit and the speed of development. The AI stuff is definitely exciting too. I know, I'm not on the AI team and can't speak to any timelines or anything like that, but I know that we're really excited about all the groundwork that was laid down there, because like Andrew said earlier, it does open up a lot of possibilities. Now that we have AI that knows about Bubble, we can start really adding super powerful features all over the editor, not only like for user support, but also for user education and teaching them how to use Bubble, and then also troubleshooting your app, right? Like those are all areas that I think the whole team is really excited about diving into. So
yeah, I think that's a great one, Sam. I think if I were to call one out, a comment that Emmanuel made, and having been part of discussions internally and knowing where it's coming from, one thing that he said from the stage is just that a goal of ours is for Bubble to be fun. And I think there are a lot of ways you could run with that, and I'll almost leave it for people to, I think it's an incredible statement on its own, but as Bubble devs that are in the editor every day, we know that there are frustrating things with the editor as it exists now, the design, the blank canvas problem, things about how the editor functions currently. And so to tie in with what Sam said, there is a lot of progress that's been made behind the scenes that I think we're going to see some really interesting updates to Bubble to make it more fun. And fun can mean faster and smoother and more dependable. And so I'm very excited for some of those things that are currently behind the scenes that I think could be very interesting.
I'll also call out the continued editor modernization efforts. That's another one. Like, I think the workflow tab is kind of the first step, but you heard Missy, our head of design, kind of talking about the future vision of the editor, the future of the PE, and all of the different parts of it. I think that we're going to continue to see some really great UI and UX improvements in the editor over the next year.
Yeah.
Really exciting. Well, wow, what a great way to wrap up this year's BubbleCon. Thanks so much for both taking the time out to speak to us. It's really, really appreciated. What an amazing few days. And I think, I completely agree with what you're both saying. I think we're in for quite an exciting year, not just in Bubble, but in, software development and AI in general. There are more opportunities than ever. This is the time, if you're kind of on the edge about thinking about dipping your toes in and building something, there's never been a better time. So
absolutely agree.
Just get in there, get started, and start having fun in the Bubble edge.
Love it.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks so much, Sam and Andrew.
It's our pleasure.
That's been really awesome.
Thanks for having us on.
No problem at all. Thank you.
Awesome.